As we heard today in our gospel, particularly the beginning of it, there will be a time when you will not stone upon another stone that will not be thrown down. It seems almost completely opposite of the feast we celebrated last week. Last week we celebrated the dedication of the Lateran Basilica, and as we remembered that feast, one of the things that we were remembering was the fact that this basilica in Rome, dedicated to St. John the Baptist and our own St. John the Evangelist, was dedicated in the year 324. And here it still stands. After wars and fires and plagues, the fall of the Roman Empire, the unification of Italy, the fall of fascist Italy, all sorts of different things, that temple, that church, stands tall and stands proud. And then today we're thrown right into the mix of this reading where Jesus seems to be undoing that. And it is a little bit of a break because had we had last week, had it been the 32nd Sunday of Ordinary Time, we would have been kind of prepared for the readings we're hearing today. And the readings we're hearing today really do start focusing us on the end times. It helps us to begin to focus about what's going to happen and where is our ultimate destination. But what happens between now and then? If we keep in mind where our final destination is, not to borrow the names of the movies, but we think about our ultimate destination, what happens between now and that point? And Jesus' disciples had lived with them, had walked with him, he taught them, and for 3 years they were a band of brothers. And here we have Jesus beginning to prepare them for what's going to happen. And like you and I, we want to know what's going to happen. So the disciples press Jesus. And like, when is this going to happen? When are things going to get tough? And in typical Jesus fashion, he doesn't answer it, right? Instead of answering it, what he does is he tells a story. And he points out something else. And it's a really opportune time for us to think about that for ourselves because we know our ultimate destination one day, and where we're hoping that our perseverance will get us is heaven. That's where we hope to get. And our faith in Jesus Christ and our belief in him and our desire to follow him each and every day has as its ultimate goal to get us to heaven. But there's still time between now and then. And as Jesus says in the gospel, the time between now and then isn't always easy. And you and I know that. In the gospel, we hear of wars and insurrections. We hear of being seized and persecuted, being brought on trial, being separated from your family. And Jesus tells them, don't prepare your testimony beforehand, because I myself will give you a wisdom no one can refute, no one can resist. I myself will do that. And those same words are given to you and I as we go about our daily living. Those same words are given to us as we face the struggles that we face too in this time between now and our ultimate goal of heaven. You and I know that this life isn't easy, but it's a blessing. There are times when we deal with sickness, disease, which is sickness, the loss of a job, strangled and tough relationships, and many other things that find ourselves wondering, how does this all work together? And where's Jesus? And the disciples, Jesus was preparing them for taking ownership for their final destination, for their willingness to walk forward, even though he wasn't going to be there physically with them, but an assurance that he was always going to remain with them. As I reflected this week, it kind of got me thinking about how I learned how to ride a bike. When I was a kid, I was very happy riding my bike with training wheels. You can't fall down, it's great, not a problem. But one day my dad told me, you're gonna have to ride that bike without training wheels. Why? I'm fine this way. Now, as a 46-year-old, I'm glad I can ride a bike without training wheels. But each day, we would go out in our backyard. When I grew up in Strongsville, we would practice. And every day, my dad was there. Every day, he would help me, and I'd be riding. He'd be holding the back of the bike. And then one day, he said, we're going to take those training wheels off, and I'm going to keep holding that bike. But one day, you're going to have to ride it yourself. And sure enough, I'm like, well, but Dad, I don't know why I have to do that. And sure enough, one day in the backyard, he let go. Now, he was right behind me. He was running right behind the bike, ready to grab me. But I made it my own bike ride. And I took ownership from that day forward to ride the bike. But I knew in the back of my head, my dad was right there. And so in same ways, that's what Jesus is asking the disciples to consider, that it's important for them, as it is for you and I, to take ownership for our faith, to take ownership for that which we have received, and to be able to look at that which we experience throughout our lives and to realize that ultimately God walks with us always. So there's nothing to fear. That our final home and our final destination, the place that we're hoping our perseverance gets us, is to heaven, where there's no more pain, no more suffering, no more loss, nothing but the fullness of God's kingdom. And as the disciples went on to take ownership for their faith, and we know they did because they went on to spread throughout the world, and you and I stand as a product of what the disciples then became the apostles shared. As they took ownership for their own faith in the midst of the struggles, knowing that Jesus was with them, so too you and I are to do in our daily living. And while they had the physical presence of Jesus for those 3 years that he was in public ministry, he left them the gift of himself. One of his final things he said is, "Behold, I will be with you always and to the end of the ages." And that statement holds true today. And every time we gather around this altar, Jesus recommits himself to us, because he who promised to remain with us always until the end of the ages becomes present on this altar, from which then we receive him. And by our reception of him, by the fact he becomes a part of our lives, that strengthens us in our ability to persevere. It strengthens us in our ability to follow him and to realize that, yes, at times things can be difficult, at times things can be a blessing, but ultimately our final home isn't here, but it awaits a great joy in heaven. And by our perseverance, by our believing, and by our trying every day to follow Jesus more and more closely, we too can get to heaven. And it doesn't matter what comes our way. It doesn't matter when the end of time will be. It doesn't matter if there's wars or insurrections or pain and suffering, because Jesus is right there with us, and he'll accompany us until our final home. And so today, as those first disciples did, and as I did when I learned how to ride my bike, let us take ownership for the faith that we have. Let us take ownership for knowing that no matter what we face, Jesus is right there with us. He will give us that wisdom. He will give us that strength that no one can ever take from us, no one can refuse, and ultimately no one can refute, because the promise that he gave us remains true today as it was on that first time he issued those words. He remains with us always unto the end of the ages.